Hey, good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Trail Tidbits. I'm Eric Kane alongside Matt Ray, getting you caught up on Tennessee commits and key targets following week 8 of the high school football season. Matt, just a couple more weeks left, and it's playoff time for these high school football players. And then before you know it, we'll be over here for bowl practices, National Signing Day. It
Yep.
is rapidly approaching.
Yeah, it's just another week of the high school football season in the books, and every week it seems to be more and more competitive, which is what you want. I mean, man, this past week was a good week of games if you look at it kind of across the state, and we'll touch on some key performers from across the country a little later in the show. But this is by far the best time of the year. Anything can kind of happen in high school football, especially at those higher levels right now. So, for me, it's a lot easier to go cover games that are competitive. When you're out on the sidelines on Friday night, I got to watch a really good game on Friday night as Jeremiah's Herd and Model were at Fannin County, Georgia, and it was kind of slow, heavy rain. You know, for the most part. And then when it opened up, the Fannin County offense got going a little bit, down 28-7 at one point in the second half. Drove, I think, under 5 minutes, it was 28-14. It drove down, scored, made it 28-21. Managed to get the ball back, went down and scored with about 6 or 9 seconds left, and went for two. Drew up a beautiful play and fell harmlessly to the turf. So ended up being a 28-27 victory for Model. When you're only there to see one kid, it makes it a little bit easier when that team wins.
Yeah, speaking of which, talking about Model right there, let's go ahead and talk about Jeremiah's Herb. We've got, we'll talk about a couple players here off the top. We'll talk about the weekend coming up, and then, of course, highlight some of those stat performers. But Jeremiah's Herb, you went there to see him. There's been a whole lot of chatter about the Tennessee commit maybe getting some Notre Dame interest, maybe taking a visit to Notre Dame. What's the latest with Jeremiah's Herb, the Tennessee commit?
Yeah, so the rain did not deter Notre Dame from coming out to see Jeremiah's Hurt on Friday night. They were in attendance to see the big 6'9", 300-pound prospect. Trying to quietly work into this recruitment and sneak him up there for an official visit. It didn't go off quite as planned. Jeremiah's Herd was at the midpoint of the day on Friday planning to go to Notre Dame. But after conversation with Tennessee throughout the weekend, will no longer take that visit. I think this is a guy that Notre Dame sees kind of the same thing that everybody else sees. Really, really high ceiling. You don't know where that floor is, but when you look at what he can do potentially on each side of the football, the ceiling is so high for him. So Notre Dame had started reaching out to him about 7 days ago, and we're working, let him know that they would come out, wanted to come out and see him play, and then we're in the process of getting an official visit set up. And he was, looking at heading up to the Notre Dame USC game. Not going to happen. Kudos to Tennessee for getting that shut down. He'll be back in town in Knoxville in November for the Georgia game.
All right, so Jeremiah's Hurd, who's just continuing to get better and better. Brand new to football last year. He's a basketball player, but obviously Tennessee first in there and see something in him, and we'll see what he looks like here in a couple of years. Let's shift gears to Cam Michael. Of course, Cam Michael took an official visit to Tennessee a couple of weeks ago. There's been a lot of chatter out there. Tennessee, Georgia's trying to get back in this one. Colorado, A&M. Offense, defense. Where are we with Cam Michael, and potentially a commitment date could be in store? Chad dropped a note on the board the other day.
Yeah, this is one that for me is getting to that point where I think Cam Michael's got to sit down and figure out some different things. I think he likes some of these schools for a lot of different reasons. I think going into this weekend, I felt like probably Texas A&M was the biggest competitor for Tennessee. I'm not sure that I feel completely different from that right now, but I think Colorado is quietly in this more than I gave them credit for. They've continued to just lay in there and not give up on Cam Michael. His cousin, a 4-star edge at Statesboro High School that he plays with, just committed to Deion Sanders' program earlier this week. So I think there's a lot of different interest for Cam Michael at all of these programs. When you talk to folks about Georgia, it seems like maybe there's been more conversation there about playing some wide receiver, but I don't know that they've really gone all the way away from recruiting him as a defensive back. We touched on this last week on Trail Tidbits. Will he make it to Kentucky at the end of the month for that official visit? Was a little bit skeptical about it at the time and remain skeptical about it. Right now, that visit's still scheduled, but we'll see if it comes to fruition. And for me, I think over these next 3 weeks, let's see where Cam Michael ends up on campus. I think there's a chance that he's going to take some unofficial visits. I think there's a chance he gets back to Tennessee. Chad seems to feel like he will, possibly commit around Thanksgiving weekend right there, or around Thanksgiving Day possibly, which is November 23rd this year. And originally that's where things were supposed to be. It felt like that timeline had creeped up. He told us when he left the Tennessee official visit that he was eyeing later this month or the first week of November, hopefully having it done by November 3rd. But I think as he's seen these schools, Tennessee and Texas A&M, officially over the last 2 weekends, I think he's had a lot more to think about. I think he's had a lot more putt in front of him. And I think he's still got some questions that he wants answered. He's been very diligent in this process. And I think for Cam, I think right now it's why rush it? Just get it right. If it's another 20 days, none of these programs are moving on him from him. Just get it right. And I think that's what he's trying to do right now. So we'll see. I feel like right now where Tennessee sits in this one, but, we've got basically 6 weeks until a potential decision timeline for Cam Michael plays out, and there's work to do.
So that brings us to this weekend. Upwards of 25, 30, maybe 35 players expected to be on campus. A lot of 25s. And let's start the conversation, Matt, with Tennessee's guy, the one they want, the quarterback position of the class of 2025. George McIntyre put out a top 10 earlier this week. Tennessee, of course, is in there. It's a top 10. There's already a top 4 or 5 probably off the record. George McIntyre getting on campus to see in Tennessee for the first time this year, right?
Yeah, I believe for the first time this fall. He was in attendance for the Virginia game,
Yeah.
bought a ticket and went with his family for that. But the first time inside of Neyland Stadium this fall. So another opportunity to get him back to campus. Should be back to campus in November as well for the Georgia game. Tennessee's continued to prioritize George McIntyre to this point, as has Alabama and as has several others. Right now, those two teams, though, are the teams that you hear the most consistent buzz around, Tennessee and Alabama. I think for George, I think you're right, Eric. I think there probably is, inside of that top 10, 4 or 5 schools that are standing out more so than the rest. But at the end of the day, this is going to be one that you're going to have to work. I mean, he is an elite prospect with elite tools, and teams are not going to go away for him. He's a guy that can just do a variety of things with a football, as you see right there, just really accurate, 6'5" guy, and so much room to grow into his frame. So he's only going to get stronger, and the football's only going to, throwing the football should only improve for George McIntyre over time. But this weekend, big for Tennessee to get him back. He'll be around a core group of in-state guys, specifically Cam Sparks, who he is close with. They play 7-on-7 ball. They do some training together with Tennessee Select. And then 4-star defensive lineman Ethan Utley will also be in. But this is a good weekend for Tennessee in terms of getting some 2025s back to campus.
Yeah, let's go to Cam Sparks, 2025, expected to be on campus, a guy that I feel like has been to campus probably 100 times in the last couple of years. I remember him coming up as an 8th grader as soon as the if my math is right, maybe a freshman year. Anyway, as soon as the dead period was lifted, and he's coming up here. When you talk about those key in-state guys for the class of 2025, obviously GMAC, and then it's Cameron Sparks, probably the second guy out of your mouth is going to be Cam Sparks. Another chance for him to see Tennessee, at least on a game day, to be a good one against A&M.
Yeah, Cam Sparks has been to Tennessee a lot. There's a lot of comfort when he comes to Tennessee because of that. It's just a refresher, right? It's more about being around the staff and not getting, lost up in everything that's kind of going on. And I think he's kind of able to take more in, study the offense, and see what's going on from that standpoint. So anytime you can get a guy to campus, it's important, especially when it's a guy like Cam Sparks. Cam has no public top list of schools to this point, but the Vols are certainly one of the schools among his favorites. Georgia working really hard on this one. Auburn is a team that, really since the spring has worked really hard on Cameron Sparks, trying to get him to campus, trying to impress upon him that he's a priority for them. But he's a guy that's just working through this process. He's very quiet. Um, you know, he's more focused on relationships and how he can fit into an offense. We talked about Cam Sparks back in the summer, and one thing that we talked about with Cam Sparks was he's a quiet kid. He's a nice kid, big smile. When he figures out that he can be that off the field and he can be the aggressor on the field, it's going to come together. This fall, he's figured that out. As a junior, it started to come together. I don't think it's so much of the deer in the headlight look for him, that he had starting at a premier program as a freshman and a sophomore. It's really clicking for Cam Sparks this fall. He's put together a really good season at Baylor so far.
So again, Cam Sparks going to be on campus, another one of those in-state talents that Tennessee needs to be all over. That's going to be Ethan Utley. What can you tell us about Ethan Utley and his commitment so far and kind of where that stands?
Ethan Utley is a guy that, is a disruptor from the inside, as you can see right there. But he's really growing into his game, growing into his frame. Can do a lot of different things from a lot of different techniques at the high school level, but just a super high ceiling. A guy that Rodney Garner has keyed in on early. Tennessee was through to check on him during the evaluation period. I've been out to see him at already this fall. He was here at the end of July as Tennessee hosted their final cookout of the summer and had their priority targets mostly consisting of 2025s in. He's very familiar with Rodney Garner. His mother was at Georgia when Rodney was there. So there's a long-standing relationship from that. He knows what he's done as a defensive line coach. And he's a guy that's seen Tennessee a pretty good bit. And this is a game day experience that I think the Vols will definitely make him feel like a priority. He has a handful of big-time schools showing him interest. As you see right there, he gets to George McIntyre.
George.
So a guy that can do a lot of different things along the defensive front and is a priority in the in-state class for the Vols for sure in 2025.
Yeah, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Tennessee's got a nice little pipeline from Innsworth coming in. Tyler Barron originally from there, of course. Wesley Walker, Andre Turrentine, I believe, came from Innsworth, and so maybe these guys, of course, Barron went to Knox Catholic as well before coming to Tennessee, but Tennessee's had some really good success recruiting Innsworth, and potentially Utley could be that next one. All right, let's look back at Week 8 performances from Tennessee targets and commits from around high school football in this area. We'll start with a Tennessee commit in Jordan Ross, who had a pretty nice day, Matt Ray.
Jordan Ross just continues to have a really nice senior season at Astavia Hills if they continue to improve and win football games. I think when you look at Jordan Ross, where he's at in the rankings, he's a guy that I think everybody wanted to see those measurables and everything start to stack up this fall. And so far they have a really consistent senior season, kind of here past the midpoint for Jordan Ross, as he has done a lot of things and, is living up to that top 50 rating that you see right here. One of his more productive games this fall was against Hoover. And it's a powerhouse in the state of Alabama, and he has just produced week in and week out on the gridiron this fall. And it seems like football is coming a little bit more naturally to him. He's continued to grow, and he again, another guy that's becoming more of the aggressor.
So we'll move on now. We talked Jordan Ross. Let's go to the offensive side of the football. A friend of the program, Tennessee commit wide receiver, Braylon Staley. We've talked about him. He's a guy that just has really good stats every single week. Another good outing for the Tennessee wide receiver commits. 4 receptions, 72 yards, and a touchdown in his game on Friday night.
Chasing that 1,000-yard mark that's eluded him to this point in his career, and man, he is on track for it. A guy that, this game was pretty much in hand for Braylon Staley, so didn't have to have him do a lot. Not the typical, 11 for 160 and a couple of touchdowns, but 4 for 72 and a touchdown, still very respectable. Obviously, the biggest news around Braylon Staley for the past week is South Carolina offered.
Yeah.
What's going on with the Gamecocks. His family has reiterated to AP that they're fully committed to Tennessee. It would not be surprising to see him get back down to Knoxville this weekend. Haven't heard anything confirmed here early in the week, but I think there's a good chance that he's back in Knoxville this weekend. We'll see.
Let's move on. Let's look at one of those junior college defensive linemen that we talked about last week. This is Kamari Copeland. Nice effort Saturday in his game, 5 tackles, a fumble recovery. And, of course, Tennessee was out on the road to see he and some others on the junior college trail this past weekend during the bye week.
Yeah, Kamari Copeland, a guy that, man, when you turn his film on, he is a guy that has just a really, really nice burst up the field for a down lineman on the defensive side of the football. You can see why so many of these teams are starting to pay attention to him after his junior year. He's violent with his hands, does a lot of different things. He's a disruptor. Continuing to kind of live in the backfield at this junior college level. Tennessee threw the check on him. I think he's feeling like a priority for the Vols right now. Was originally planning to come in on an official visit this weekend. Some personal matters won't allow that to happen. He will be here in November when Tennessee hosts Georgia.
And then last up, we talked about him about being the one of the key visitors here this weekend. Obviously, that's George McIntyre. How did he do in his football game this past weekend? Well, just your average, 24 for 33, 361 yards, 4 touchdowns. That, my friend, is a Power 5 stat line at the high school level.
Yeah, I mean, have a day, right? And here's the thing about 24 for 33, 361, and 4 scores. And, man, a lot of the night, George McIntyre is running for his life, spinning off of a tackle. If you go over to his Twitter right now, you'll see the last 2 games for him, or last 2 or 3 games, spinning throws, just making something out of nothing. And, I think you can look at that and say, oh, it's just the high school level. He should be doing this guy's 6'5". Like, he's making some of this stuff look easy. I think, again, with George McIntyre, you can see it right here, Eric, just a guy that...
Ooh, that's nice.
Yeah. I mean, and the other one is a throw against Macaulay. So, I mean, again, I think you see a guy that has all of these tools, and is only continuing to grow into his frame. So he's only going to improve some of these things that he's doing off schedule and, the way that he's working down the field. But a big boy weekend for George McIntyre.
Yeah, no doubt about it. As you just continue to scroll down his Twitter, you just see play after play. Look at that throw right there if you're watching on YouTube. Oh, my goodness, what a shot.
That was unbelievable. That was against Baylor.
Yeah, what a shot. He's a good player. And again, give Tennessee credit, Tennessee's coaching staff credit. They kind of zero in. Of course, Deuce was in this conversation as well. Great player, but they zero in on the guy that they want. And the last couple of cycles, they've got him. So obviously, Tennessee showing up in the top 10 for George McIntyre. He's going to be in this weekend, and we'll see kind of what this looks like in the winter heading on to the spring. Matt Ray, another good Trail Tidbits. A lot of great information. Appreciate it, man. Again, a huge weekend coming up, and you and AP are going to have all that coverage, the preview coverage in the war room, and as the week goes on, then, of course, we'll all be on the phone working to get some information for people who were here over the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And another guy that did not make the stat sheet stuffer this week, but did have a big game on Friday night, was Milton High School 2025 cornerback target Dylan Lewis. Had a nice pick 6, released his top 8 featuring the Vols, and teased that a commitment could be coming soon.
Dylan Lewis, if memory serves me correct,
You're right. You don't even have to go any further. You're right.
Yes.
That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah, me and you, we hung out that night. I remember.
We did. Yeah, I wasn't a Volquester at that time, but that was probably our first joint interview.
Yeah, one of our first joint interviews, and I remember, man, he was so young, and that might have been the first time he was ever interviewed in his life. But it was over on campus.
I think it probably was. Yeah.
Yeah, but interviewed a couple of times since. Trail Tidbits, we'll see what's in store for Tennessee commits and targets for Week 9 of the high school football season, and we'll have it all right here on Trail Tidbits next week, volquest.com.